when it comes to solidarity research, there are three key principles that are connected to it. The first is, so this is a graphic that was created by an organization called the Data Center that was based in Oakland, and they really sort of did work around the concept of research justice, that research was another form of organizing, and it was a way of lifting up voices, particularly of frontline workers and communities. And the idea is that, research in sort of the mainstream world, it's connected to power, right? So whoever has the power in society ends up defining what knowledge is and what gets written in the history books and what we end up considering, as what gets printed, in research reports. And, the vision of solidarity research, research justice, is that we should also take into account other forms of knowledge, including lived experience. And that should be just as important as, sort of mainstream knowledge or sort of hegemonic knowledge. The other principle is that there is no distance between the researcher and what is being studied, so to speak. So I studied anthropology, and they often talked about how the field of anthropology started off with people sitting apart from the community that they were trying to study, and sitting on their porch or their veranda and observing the people that they're trying to understand. And I think with solidarity research, we really erase that boundary so that there is no difference between the researcher and the so-called research, or between the subject and the object. And so we very intentionally situate ourselves, because we do research primarily about social movements. We are situated within social movements, and we are very clear about, what our values and what our ideological framework is. We don't pretend to be values neutral. I think there's a critique around folks that say research needs to be unbiased. There's always bias, right? If you don't acknowledge what that bias is, it's probably something that reflects mainstream knowledge or common sense knowledge. So we acknowledge that we have a different type of sort of counter-hegemonic framework. And so we also, because we do research in relationship with social movements and sort of embedded within social movements, we are part of them, we are also accountable to social movements as well. And then the last principle is that we think that people they know the solutions to the problems that they face. So they don't need an outside expert or an outside researcher to come into their community and tell them what the problems are and what the solutions are, but they can go through a process of critical thinking and questioning and arrive at what the solutions to their problems are. I think we read about that in the chapter around movement halfway homes that talked about the Highlander Folk School and how it was very much based on this idea of bringing people together so they can see each other as a collective and then coming up with the solutions that way. And so I think this is also reiterating the fact that everyone is an expert. It's not just the scientist or the researcher in a white lab coat, but everyday people, and everyday experience is part of the knowledge that contributes to our understanding of the world. This is a graphic that, again, was also created by the Data Center, and it was just a way of illustrating that, we have different forms of knowledge and information, including lived experiences, stories, community histories. And that's as opposed to what is considered like mainstream knowledge, what gets printed in newspapers or research reports, and how there can be a process of knowledge production that prioritizes those grassroots forms of data and information. One of the campaigns that we worked on, so I talked a little bit about the incarcerated workers campaign. another campaign that really deeply inspiring for me was the solidarity research we did for a farm worker union in Bellingham, Washington. So these are farm workers that, mostly came from a particular area in Mexico, in Oaxaca. Many of them were indigenous, Zapotec or Mixtec, and they, traveled up the West Coast, and based on, the seasons and based on whatever like crops were needing to be harvested, they would go from like Oaxaca to like Baja California to the Central Coast in California up to, rural Washington. And they believed that they were at a particular farm called Sakuma Brothers. These workers believed that they were being cheated of what they were owed. So they were being paid by the piece rate. Do folks know what the piece rate is? We typically think about, getting wages based on time, right? Based on your hour, based on, maybe working 40 hours a week or 35 hours a week. So these folks were paid by how much, what the weight of in this case, blueberries were that they harvested. So at the end of the day, they would bring, their bushel of blueberries, and it would be weighed on a scale, and they would be paid on that basis. And the pay was very minimal. So the workers believed that they were subject to wage theft, so they weren't paid the wages that they were owed. So together with them, we decided that the workers would bring their own scales into the fields and weigh, how much they harvested, and they would take pictures of what that weight was and also what that weight that the employers had on their scale. And it showed that there was a discrepancy, that indeed they were truly being, cheated out of their wages. We also worked with them to find out that Sakuma Brothers ended up being distributed by a larger corporation called Driscoll. And Driscoll, in turn, I for years didn't eat berries. It's only recently that I started eating berries. But Driscoll, like you often see, like if you buy strawberries or blueberries in the supermarket, you'll see that the berries are coming from that company. And Driscoll, in turn, then sources their berries to Haagen-Dazs, which uses their berries in their ice cream to flavor their ice cream. So this ended up becoming a boycott that lasted, from 3 years, from 2013 to 2016, of Driscoll, of Haagen-Dazs, and eventually the workers won their first contract with the family farm, and so they established an independent farm worker union called Familias Unidas. And since then, they've also established a cooperative farm called Tierra y Libertad, which is really exciting. Okay, so then the last area that I was going to talk about was radical municipalism. So I think, one of the recommended readings was the chapter by Murray Bookchin around the municipal agenda. So he sort of he's credited oftentimes as the, sort of thinker around municipalism. But there's a lot of folks that have talked about it, not just Murray, right? So municipalism is this idea that we can, I talked before about how the solidarity economy movement wants to build a different economy based on this idea of solidarity. Municipalism is this idea that we can challenge power and authority by having really sort of participatory and democratic processes at the level where we can see each other. So at the level of a neighborhood, of a town, of a city. And then through that, we can then challenge, authoritarianism and the state ultimately. And then there can be this transition from the current, form of governance, which is based on the state, to this, it's like dual power, to this other model that is more democratic and participatory. that's the ultimate idea behind radical municipalism, which is the idea that sort of inspired us. And this is a beautiful graphic that an artist that works with us, Michelle Sales, put together around actually the first lesson that we did around radical municipalism, just sort of exploring the ideas of what it looks like to have, direct democracy, dual power, civic platforms. And so there's a lot of examples around of municipalism and a lot of different traditions that go into informing municipalism. So one that I particularly find really interesting is by a Black Panther named Huey P. Newton. So he had this idea of revolutionary intercommunalism, which is I think a similar idea to radical municipalism. And there's three examples that we draw inspiration from. The first is Barcelona and Camus. So this was a city government. This was actually, it started off as a platform that a group of housing organizers came up with. So these were folks that worked against evictions coming out of the Great Recession. And they decided, we're occupying squares, we're occupying our homes to prevent evictions. The next step is to occupy city institutions. So they ran a platform of a housing organizer for mayor, and they won. And this was in 2013. And they were in power for about 10 years until 2023. And they implemented a lot of really amazing municipalist reforms. They had neighborhood assemblies where people talked about different policy issues and made decisions. They banned Airbnb, which was, removing housing off of available for people to live in. And they established these what they called super blocks. These which would be. There was actually legislation passed in LA about maybe 2 years ago to explore the idea of superblocks in LA, which would be amazing. It's just this idea that we should be able to walk to where we buy our food, where our child is taken care of, where we work. We shouldn't have to spend hours on the freeway, which we often do, to get from place to place. And, the city should be built for pedestrians as opposed to cars. And so they created these, pedestrian-friendly super blocks where everything is walkable in Barcelona. So that's one of the first examples, Barcelona and Camus. The other one is Cooperation Jackson, which Janet spoke about earlier. So it's a network of different cooperatives in Jackson, Mississippi. And that movement in particular is very interesting because it comes out of a Black Marxist movement that met starting in the 60s through the 70s, and they did a study of Black history, of political economy, and realized that they wanted to create a seat of a new African republic and for it to be located in Jackson, Mississippi because of its large Black population. So a lot of folks moved there starting in the 80s and the 90s. They won the mayoral position there, and they've been creating a solidarity economy, essentially, in Jackson, Mississippi. And then the third one is Rojava. So this is a Kurdish freedom movement. It's an ethnic minority that lives in a few different countries. They're in Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, and they're asking for self-determination. And they're organized they're really inspired by the ideas of Murray Bookchin, who authored the chapter that we read. So they and they've also added upon his ideas. So they're really prioritizing women and sort of directly democratic assemblies to make decisions. And so as far as organizing it in LA, we ended up, there's a lot of challenges to organizing in LA. First of all, it's huge. And there's 4 million people. This is just in LA City. We're not counting LA County. And one of the things that's being discussed right now is, have folks heard about the charter reform effort in Los Angeles? So the charter is the constitution for our city. It defines what powers the city council has, the mayor has, how decisions get made. And that charter was written in the 1920s when Los Angeles was first incorporated as a city. And it's only been revised once in 1999. And I think, is Simi Valley close to where we are right now? Sure. Okay, so it was revised because Simi Valley wanted to break away and form its own city. And so they ended up creating neighborhood councils as part of that charter reform in 1999. And now there's been a charter reform commission that's been meeting to talk about adding more city council members. So we currently have 15 city council members for a city of 4 million people. New York City has 51 city council members. So if you think about how the number we have like one city council member for 250,000 constituents. So there's proposals to add like up to like 25 right now. That's, I think, hopefully, fingers crossed, going to be on the ballot in November. We created an organizing project called Los Angeles for All here, which was a network of different, again, like keeping in mind the different assumptions that go into our work. It's a network of different Gesundheit, social movement organizations. And this was a beautiful graphic that an organizer, Gustavo Otsoy, created of the different organizations that were part of Los Angeles for All, including Stop LAPD Spying, Los Angeles Community Action Network, and so on.